Okay, some of you might be having some problems, some issues, so I'm going to go ahead and take you through the process of getting your low poly and high poly into Substance Painter and baking maps that you need. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and open up. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure you set your project, and for this I'm just going to go ahead and set the project that I've had before and go click on Open Scene. So I'm going to go ahead and do the low poly. Okay. Alright, so we want to export as an OBJ. So if you have all your maps completed, the FBX has a hard time understanding UV tiles. Okay, that's the situation that we're having with FBX. So it's not that they don't support it. It's just that they're having a hard time. There's some errors, and they need to work those errors out. Alright, so with that said, it can only do, so if you want to do FBX, you're going to have to lay out all the UVs in one area, and that kind of is a issue and a problem because we want all these to have different materials. So every one of these represents a different type of material. That's how you laid those out, or you should have laid those out as material IDs. So we don't have to do material ID maps when we do UDIM tiles, because we can put as many, we can separate this as fine detail as we need to. Okay. Next thing you need to make sure is that all of your UVs are within the UV texture space. 0 and 1, this being 0. Okay. And make sure that you have the right texel density. Okay, how do you do that? Well, you go ahead and click on this guy right here, the checkerboard, and look and see if it's all uniform, and it looks like it is. So we're good there. So we'll bring this back up again and turn that off, and we're done. We can shut that down. Of course, you'll need to make sure you save your UV map like I've shown you before. Now the next question is, because we're not going to save it as an FBX, I'm not too worried about what we have here, but I'm going to show you how I got how to check and how to clean up your geometry to get it in the best form it can be for baking maps. So I'm going to go in here and click on, hold down the space bar and go to Mesh and go to Cleanup. Go into the option box. Alright, we want to go ahead and select, and before you do all this, you probably want to save a, do a duplicate, create a duplicate for this in case you make a mistake, something goes terribly wrong. I'm not sure it will, but I want you to set it up like this. So clean up matching polygons, apply to selected objects, keep construction history, that's important. And then you want to click on faces with more than 4 sides, concave faces, faces with holes, non-planar faces, lamina faces, non-manifold geometry, and normals and geometry is going to check for those. Alright, so get those set up and just click on clean up. Alright, so it cleans it all up. I'm going to go back into selection mode, and now I want to go to mesh, and I want to triangulate everything. Even though everything's triangulated, it will triangulate what has not been triangulated. Okay, so now when I click on it, you can see that before this was not triangulated, now it is. So anything that wasn't is now triangulated. So that should accept all the map information from the high poly. So all we need to do is go ahead and click on this, and we're going to do low, just rename it, low underscore poly gun. Click enter, and then we're going to go into file and import. Okay, so just go ahead and import, and now we're going to look for the high poly. Alright, so here's the high poly here. Let's go ahead and import that. And here's the high poly. We're going to leave it as is. Make sure it's fitting within the low poly. It's got to be as perfect as it possibly can. So let's take a look at this, and this will be high. And we're going to say it's going to be poly, and then gun. We want to rename it exactly the same, low polygon and high polygon. And with this, we don't have to really do much of anything. One of the issues that you have to really watch out for is that you can see there's the low poly, there's the high poly, and for some reason they're not matching. Now, for this instance, it won't be a major issue, but if you want the bake to be as perfect as possible, these have to align the best as possible. So it looks like whoever modeled this and has some issues with geometry here. They didn't do, I don't know, they may have changed it or expanded it or made it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to leave it as is and see how it bakes. I'm sure it'll be fine. Let's go ahead and go in here. And so let's go ahead and select both of them and click on center pivot, delete by type history, and freeze transformations. And at this point you probably want to save your scene. I'm not going to, but you probably need to save your scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the low poly first, go to File, Export Selection, and we're going to do OBJ. Again, I explained that the FBX doesn't really support Udemy tiles, and if it does, it still has some issues with it. So I haven't had any issues with using OBJ. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Export and go ahead and rename it here and export it out. I've already done that, so I'm going to leave it as is. And then you do the same with the high poly. Go to File, Export Selection, and then export as an OBJ and rename it. Okay. So I rename it Low Polygon 01, and the high poly I named High Polygon 01 OBJ. Okay. Alright, so we're done with this. Let's go ahead and go into our Substance Painter. I'll go ahead and create a new one here. So go to New. And up in here, we're going to go to Select. And we're going to select the Low Poly. Remember what we called it? Okay. Go ahead and open that. And because we've got Udemy tiles, I'm not going to go 4096. You could do that, of course, but Udemy tiles gives you a lot more room, wiggle room, and we're going to go with a lower document resolution. We also want to have Use UV Tile Workflow selected, and you want to click and select Convert UV Tiles into Individual Texture Sets Legacy. When everything is exactly the way you want it, then you can just go in here and click OK. And I'm going to discard what I have here because we're going to start from scratch here. There we go. So there's the low poly. And so the next thing we're going to do is kind of look at our Udemy tiles here. You can see we've got that. Udemy tiles over here in your Udemy your texture set. You can turn those off and on if you want to. You can see where your Udemy tiles are, which is wonderful. I like used in Legacy. I'm used to this. Okay. All right. And you can see we don't have any of that detail on here. Okay. Right. So just notice that. All right. Great. So now we're going to go ahead and bake the maps. They're all ready. So right up at the top here you can see we got layers, and then we got texture set settings. And in here you can go to the top, but we're going to go all the way to the bottom, and it says mesh maps, and then bake mesh maps. And click on that. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is going to set the texture resolution size to 2048, dilation at 32. We want a normal map. We don't want a world space normal. We don't want an ID map. You may or may not want an ambient occlusion. We'll go ahead and create that. You may or may not want the curvature, but this is the curvature, position, and thickness are all good for when you use smart materials. So if you want to use smart materials, you're going to need to have the ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness. Those are all very important. Since you did a Udemy tile, we don't need to use ID maps because that's how you separate it for materials. So we've already done that. So it's all in Udemy tiles. And world space normal we don't need. We just need normal. Okay. So with that said, we're going to go to high definition meshes and pick on the one we have. So let's go to high polygon. That's what we called it. Click open. And then here we could bake it, but I don't think it'll pull all the maps that we want, all the normal areas, the details. So and it can go from 0.5 to 1. You just kind of have to play with it a little bit. Each model is going to be different. I could show you something here, and then you might have to change it and experiment with it. But I'm going to do 0.5 on that one, and then 0.5 on this one. Here we go. Everything else is just defaulted. Okay, so we're good. So click on Bake Selected Textures. So what it's doing is it's baking all of the Udemy tiles separately, and it's doing it actually fairly quickly. It will still take time. Almost done here. We're about 75. Now we're about 80%. So it's getting there. And we've got 10 Udemy tiles, so we're just about there. There we go. Looks like it's done. And all you have to do is click OK. Now we didn't get any errors. That's really, really good. Okay. As far as the baking process go, but when we look at this, let's go ahead and make this just a little bit bigger so we can see it. Let's move this over. Get a nice little clean look at this. We've got what you call reflection, a shadow, which is not what we want. See that? That's a reflection and shadow of things we don't want to see. And we get it all. We have it all over the place. So we don't want it on the back part. So hopefully you have Udemy tiles that are set up just for the low poly, the inner part. Okay, that's where all these issues are. All of these, and it's just basically shadow. These are the shadows that the normal map has baked, and we've got a really nice bake right back here. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right. So all we have to do is kind of clean that part up. Now I already know that this particular model, the creator of this model, put what I'm looking for at the very bottom. So I'm finding the layer of this where I've got all these shadows on here, which I want to take out. So you could go in here and you can click these on and off until you find the right one. But I found this to be it. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the inside piece here. Okay. Alright, so what you want to do is you want to put the base inside piece, not the armor on the outside, on its own layer. So I've got to find that one. You can see that it baked all this craziness on the inside, which we'll never see. Okay. So instead of, now that I know that's it, I know that the curvature map for that is up here. So what I want to do is I'm going to go click on 1010. Okay. Let's bring this back a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing here. So what I want to do is I want to turn off the normal maps for that. Okay, just turn off the normal maps for that. So this is normal map. What I can do is I can just go into and click that off. Now watch what happens here when I turn that off. Wow, look at that. It's gone. Okay. Now what you see is another shadow of what's called an ambient occlusion map. So we have to turn that off. Boom, it's gone. So now you got this really nice clean piece underneath. Okay. Alright, so that's all taken care of. Alright, so the next thing is you just continue to go through here and find the pieces that work best. And we've got some issues here, as you can see, so you might want to kind of play around and check these. I wouldn't worry too much about inside here, but what we want to do is kind of find those areas here. So I'm going to go back through here. I don't know why that changed. That sometimes you have to watch that. There we go. Right, so you just go through here and make sure you turn off the maps that you don't need. Let's go back. I can Control Z back and get it back. Make sure you highlight that part. There we go. Now know what you're doing, so Control Z back. You don't like what's happening here. Okay, I'm going to Control Z back. Alright. Okay, you can just go through here and just kind of fiddle with it until you get the right. And you can go back into Maya, obviously, and make adjustments in there too as well. Maybe you're with your UDIM tiles, because I would honestly separate and put the low poly in its own layer in UDIM tile, and the back in its own UDIM tile, and that way you can kind of control all the shadows that you see back here. Okay, that's what I did with mine. Alright, so that's it, and then you guys know how to texture the rest of it, and that's how you can get rid of some of the normal maps that are getting in the way and showing shadows. Okay, again, on the armor plating, you want those in its own layer, and then you want the underneath structure to be in its own layer together, so you can turn off the shadows that you see that are baked in with the normal and the ambient occlusion map. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful, and I'll talk to you later.